In the constant buzz of current news headlines, when Iran's name is often associated with geopolitical tensions and nuclear ambitions, few realize that the country's role has been written long ago, right in the pages of the Bible. From Genesis to Revelation, Iran, under its ancient name Persia, appears not only as an ancient civilization, but also as a key figure in the Creator's grand plan. The Bible not only reveals Persia's ancient origins, but also foretells its ultimate fate in profound, even terrifying, prophecies. We often hear about the end-time war between Gog and Magog, an alliance that will rise up against Israel. But before it became this foretold adversary, Persia was the empire chosen by God to liberate his people, rebuild the temple, and fulfill Daniel's prophecy. Let's unveil the secret that few dare to reveal about Iran's role in God's big picture, from the beginning to the last day. As the beginnings of Persia, the first map of peoples, it all begins in the book of Genesis. After the flood, God gives humanity a fresh start and reveals how nations are formed. Noah and his family are the only survivors on earth. His 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, become the fathers of new nations. Genesis chapter 10 provides the first chart of the nations of the world, listing the lineages of Noah's descendants spread across the land, each with its own clan, language, and nation. Here we discover 2 patriarchs who would lead to the birth of the Persian Empire, Madai and Elam. Madai was the son of Japheth. From him came the Mez, who settled in the northern mountains of what is now Iran. Madai's descendants gradually expanded, forming villages, clans, and tribes. They were strong mountaineers, renowned for their endurance and strong clan organization. Madai was the direct ancestor of the ancient Maids of northern Iran. The second name is Elam, son of Shem. His descendants, the Elamites, settled in southwestern Iran, on fertile land near the Persian Gulf. The First International War, Elam and Abraham. Genesis chapter 14 tells the story of the first major international war recorded in the Bible. 4 eastern kings, including King Chedorlaomer of Elam, joined forces and invaded Canaan. They sacked cities, enslaved people, and even captured Abraham's nephew Lot. Elam was not a small, insignificant tribe. They were a powerful nation and, according to the Bible, the first nation to attack God's people in his faith. But Abraham did not stand still. With 318 trained servants, he pursued the invaders, attacking them by night and defeating them completely. He rescued Lot, freed the captives, and humiliated the kings of the east. It was an unlikely victory, one that defied human logic and sent a powerful message: no eastern power could prevail over those favored by God. Rise of empire, prophecy of judgment and liberation. Though the Elamites were defeated, they did not disappear. Centuries passed, generations followed, and the tribes that Abraham had defeated, the Elamites and the Mez, grew in number and shared the same ancient land in eastern Mesopotamia. One group lived in the southwest on the fertile plains of Elam, the other in the harsh northern mountains that shaped the character of the Mez. While other empires rose and fell, a new power was quietly taking shape. From clans, then kingdoms, finally an empire emerged, the Persian Empire. Though pagan, they were never outside God's plan. Through the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah, 2 great prophecies were announced about them. The first prophecy, through Isaiah and Jeremiah, revealed that God would use Elam and the Mez as instruments of punishment for Babylon. Babylon, which had destroyed Jerusalem and burned its temple, would not escape God's judgment. He had already determined who would bring about its downfall: the united people of Iran. But the second prophecy is even more astonishing. God will not only use Persia to bring judgment, but also to use Persia as an instrument of divine deliverance. Announced through the prophet Isaiah, a pagan Persian king, not yet born, will serve as his chosen one to deliver Israel from exile and issue the decree to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Isaiah named him more than 150 years before he was born. This is what God said to his anointed one, Cyrus. Prophecy comes true: the rise of the Persian Empire. Both prophecies came true with astonishing accuracy. In the 8th century BCE, King Deost of Media united the tribes of Elam and Madai, establishing the first imperial capital in Iran at Ecbatana. His nephew Zazarith took things a step further, reforming the army and turning it into a powerful war machine that destroyed Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, one of Israel's fiercest enemies. The prophecy had begun to be fulfilled. God had raised Persia up from within as his instrument of judgment and liberation. Even as Persia grew in power, God revealed its fate through prophetic dreams. The first to see it clearly was a young Jewish prisoner living in Babylon, Daniel. It all began when the Babylonian army, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, marched on Jerusalem. The city walls collapsed, the temple was looted, and thousands were taken into slavery in foreign lands. Daniel was one of them, just a teenager when he was taken from his home and brought to the court of Babylon, then the most powerful empire in the world. But there, in the darkness, God chose him. Amid the corrupt splendor of the royal palace, Daniel remained pure. For his faithfulness, God gave him something no other prisoner had ever given: the gift of revelation and vision, not only of his own time but of the course of all human history. Right at the heart of the empire responsible for the destruction of Jerusalem, Daniel began to see how God would raise up another kingdom, one destined to replace Babylon and play a pivotal role in the fate of his own people, the Medo-Persian Empire. Second prophecy, Cyrus the Great. It all started with dreams. While Daniel was serving at court, King Nebuchadnezzar was troubled by an ominous dream in which a giant statue, made of many different metals, towered before him, radiating indescribable majesty and menace. The king was in a panic, demanding not only that someone be able to interpret the dream, but also that he's reveal it without hearing it first. None of the wise men of Babylon were up to the task, but God's prophet was ready. They brought Daniel before the king. With heavenly authority, Daniel stood before the most powerful ruler on earth and revealed something that none of the wise men of Babylon could decipher. He described the dream accurately and announced a revelation that would change the fate of the world forever. You, O king, are the head of gold, but after you another kingdom will arise, inferior to you, depicted with a breast and arms of silver. The silver statue represents not one nation, but two arms, two powerful forces joined together, Media and Persia. They remain united, but not equal, for the Persian arm will rise up stronger and take control. The prophecy is clear: Babylon will fall, and the throne will be given to a new empire chosen by God. Young Daniel, far from home, saw God's visions coming true. That vision would come true because the king God had long foretold through Isaiah was about to rise from the highlands of Persia. His name was Cyrus. Cyrus, the young king of Persia, conquered Media, united the kingdoms into the Medo-Persian Empire, and steadily grew to become the greatest power of the time, eventually turning his eyes to Babylon. The prophesied day arrived, but it was no ordinary battle. That night, King Belshazzar, grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, held a banquet for 1,000 nobles. In the midst of his drunkenness, he committed an unforgivable act. He ordered the items his grandfather had looted from the temple in Jerusalem to be brought out, and they toasted with them in honor of false gods. Suddenly, an invisible hand appeared and wrote 4 words on the palace wall: Mean, Tekel, Uphazin. The king turned pale. No one understood the meaning of these words until they summoned Daniel, who revealed their terrifying message. God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Even as these words were spoken, the prophecy began to be fulfilled. The army of Cyrus the Great diverted the Euphrates River and entered the city silently along the dry riverbed. The gates of Babylon were unlocked and thrown open by God himself. That night, King Belshazzar was killed, and the prophecy was fulfilled. Babylon falls. The Jews who had wept by the rivers of Babylon for 70 years now saw an impossible dream come true. A foreign king decreed that they could return to their homeland, Jerusalem. But Cyrus did more than just allow them to return. He funded the rebuilding of the temple and sent Jewish leaders back with royal support: Zerubbabel, a descendant of the royal line of David, and Joshua, the high priest. These men would lay the foundations, eventually restoring the place where God's name would reign. So Persia became a nation not to destroy Israel, but to rebuild it. As later visions, the bear, the ram, and the 3 great conquests. But to Daniel, God revealed another, even more terrifying vision of Persia. In this vision, 4 monsters emerged from the turbulent waters. The second monster looked like a giant bear, leaning on one side, with 3 ribs between its teeth. A voice from heaven said, "Arise and eat your fill." The bear represents the empire destined to succeed Babylon, Media, and Persia. It is a sideways beast because Persia will eventually dominate Media, and the 3 ribs represent its greatest victories: Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. Each kingdom was swallowed up and turned in Persia's relentless march of expansion. This vision was executed with cold precision. After conquering the kingdom of Lydia in Asia Minor and Babylon itself, the Persians did not stop. They set their sights on Egypt. Under Cambysheth II, son of Cyrus, the Persian army marched through the Sinai Desert and crushed Pharaoh Psammethich-Athu at the Battle of Pelusium. Egypt, Israel's ancient oppressor, had fallen to the Persian Empire, and thus the 3rd rib was torn out. These visions were not over. Years later, standing on the banks of the river Olai, Daniel was again seized by a vision that was clearer, more precise, and more terrifying than the first. Before him appeared a ram with 2 horns, but one horn was longer than the other, and the longer horn grew later. The ram charged fiercely to the west, to the north, and to the south, and no one could stand against it. Then a voice explained the meaning. The ram you saw with the 2 horns stands for the kings of Media and Persia. Once again, Persia occupies a central place in the divine plan, though this time not as an ally but as a mighty empire that conquers without resistance, charging forward like a wild beast. One terrifying detail stands out: one horn is taller than the other, a clear sign of Persian dominance over Media. Two peoples, one empire, but only one throne to rule. As the vision continued, suddenly from the west appeared a goat, swift as the wind, with a single horn standing out between its eyes. With lightning speed it charged at the ram and knocked it down, trampling it under its feet. It was a prophecy of the next empire, Greece under Alexander the Great, which would overthrow Persia with supernatural speed. At that time, Daniel did not know who the goat represented, but he clearly understood that Persia, the greatest and most glorious empire the world had ever seen, would one day fall. Divine intervention, the miracle at Susa, but the end was yet to come. In its heyday, Persia was not only invincible, it was the center of the world. Its dominion stretched from India to Ethiopia. Under King Ahasuerus, the throne of the greatest empire on earth was set in the magnificent city of Susa, in the heart of what we now call southwestern Iran, Elam. And it was here in Susa that one of the most unexpected miracles in the Bible occurred. The great empire would be saved by a single queen. Ahasuerus held a lavish feast that lasted 6 months, then invited all the people of Susa to a grand final celebration that lasted 7 days. In a moment of pride and excess, he ordered his wife, Queen Vashti, to be brought before them to show off her beauty. But Vashti refused to be humiliated before the entire empire. The king banished her, and his advisors proposed a solution: a search throughout the kingdom for a new queen. The most beautiful young virgins would be brought to the palace, where they would undergo a year of rigorous preparation before being presented to the king. One of these young women was Hasha. Although no one knew her name, an orphan born among the exiled Jews, she was raised secretly by her cousin Mordecai. In the palace, she was given a new name, Esther. Esther won the king's favor, and, unaware that she was a Jew, Ahasuerus crowned her queen. Meanwhile, lurking in the shadows of the palace, a dangerous enemy has emerged: Haman, a descendant of the Amalekites, Israel's sworn enemies. Haman has risen to the highest position next to the king. When everyone is ordered to bow before him, Mordecai, Esther's cousin, refuses. Prideful and vengeful, Haman is not satisfied with merely punishing Mordecai. Instead, he plots to destroy the entire nation. What began as a personal vendetta quickly turned into genocide. Haman approached the king and warned him of a strange people scattered throughout the kingdom, a people with special laws that did not obey the imperial decrees. Through lies, he convinced the king and sealed the death warrant with the royal ring. In less than a year, the Jews of Persia were destined for death, women and children not spared. Panic spread throughout the Jewish community, and Mordecai quickly sent word urging Esther to act. When Esther heard of the decree, she felt trapped. To save her people, she would have to approach the king uninvited, an act that carried an immediate death sentence unless the king showed mercy by extending his golden scepter to her. Finally, Esther decided to risk her life and go before the king without being summoned. God gave her favor in the king's eyes. He extended his scepter to her. But Esther took her time. She knew that timing was everything. She invited the king and Haman to a banquet, and then a second banquet. It was at that second banquet that she unleashed the truth, sharp as a knife. If we were only to be sold into slavery, she said, I would have kept quiet. But a decree has been issued to destroy me and my people. The king jumped up. Who dares to do this? Esther replied, Our enemy is this wicked man Haman. The king's face burned with rage. Haman fell to his knees, begging desperately for his life, but it was too late. On the gallows he had built for Mordecai, Haman himself was hanged. But the danger was not over. The decree remained in place, for Persian law could never be overturned. So Esther and Mordecai came up with an even bolder plan, a new decree. The king signed it, and throughout the provinces the Jews were given the right to defend themselves. What had been a day of destruction became a day of victory. Without realizing it, the Persian Empire became a fortress, a throne, and a shield for God's people. The Magi's arrival, glory to the Messiah. After Esther's miracle at Susa, Persia seemed to fade into the background of the biblical narrative. Centuries passed, empires rose and fell, and Rome took center stage. But Persia's silence did not mean absence. Centuries later, as the world silently awaited the coming of the Messiah, Persia would once again emerge. In the Gospel of Matthew, we read a passage that has been repeated millions of times, but is rarely fully understood. Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star rise in the east, and have come to worship him. Who were these wise men, and why did they travel such a long distance guided only by a sign from heaven? The word Magi comes from the Greek word magoi, which was used to describe scholars, astronomers, and priests from the East. Although their nationality is not explicitly stated in the Bible, strong evidence suggests they came from the ancient lands of Madai and Persia, the area known today as Iran. These wise men belonged to an influential religion in Persia, known for their knowledge of the stars, ancient texts, and prophetic traditions passed down through the generations. Although not kings, they were men of scholarly authority and deep spiritual understanding. It is entirely possible that among the scrolls they studied were the writings of the prophet Daniel, who had served centuries earlier in the courts of Babylon and Persia. Not only did Daniel interpret dreams at the court of King Nebuchadnezzar, but he also prophesied the coming of the Messiah with mathematical precision. In Daniel chapter 9, he wrote, "From the going forth of the decree to rebuild and restore Jerusalem until the coming of the Messiah, the Anointed One, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks." If these wise men had known about Daniel's visions, they likely would have understood that the coming of the Messiah was near. When they saw the star, they immediately realized that the promised child had been born. But what was most powerful was their reaction. They left everything behind to pursue that star. They traveled through the desert and arrived in Bethlehem, bearing 3 special gifts, each filled with prophetic meaning. Gold declared his kingship, frankincense recognized his divinity, and myrrh foreshadowed his sacrifice and death. Without realizing it, these wise men had revealed the greatest mystery in the universe. This child would be king, would be God, and would be a slain lamb. While the scholars of Jerusalem remained silent and Herod plotted his murder, the wise men from the east became the first to recognize the prophecy had been fulfilled and bow before the Messiah. This moment was more than coincidence, it was the fulfillment of prophecy. Persia, the nation that centuries earlier had liberated Israel and rebuilt its temple, was now one of the first to honor its savior. Once again, Persia was used as an instrument of divine revelation, as prophetic future alliance against Israel. From the beginning to the crib of Christ, ancient Iran, Persia, has always been intricately tied to God's ongoing plan. But Iran's story in the Bible does not end in Bethlehem. While Persia was an instrument of redemption in the past, it will also play a role in one of the darkest episodes of the prophetic future. God not only reveals Persia's beginnings, he also announces its ultimate fate. Through the prophet Ezekiel in one of the most chilling visions of the Old Testament, the war of Gog and Magog. In chapter 38, Ezekiel describes a coalition of nations rising up in the last days against the Israel that God has restored. "Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Gog, the prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Say, this is what the sovereign Lord says, behold, I am against you, Gog, Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them." Persia, modern Iran, is one of the first nations named. The very nation that helped rebuild the temple would now find itself part of an alliance against God's people. But who else makes up this alliance? Gog, the prince of Magog, is widely understood by biblical scholars to be a powerful leader who emerged from the northern regions, often associated with Russia or a Eurasian alliance. Ancient Cush, Nubia may refer to areas of modern Sudan. Put is associated with North Africa, possibly the Libyan region. Gomer and Togarmah are near Turkey and the Caucasus. Together, they form an international army that Ezekiel describes as surging like a storm against Israel. "You will go up like a storm. You will cover the land like a cloud, you and all your troops and many peoples with you." But they will not succeed, because this attack will provoke direct intervention from God, bringing terrible judgment, earthquakes, fire, chaos among the troops, and the glory of the Lord will shine forth amid the chaos. "Thus I will display my greatness and my holiness. I will make myself known in the eyes of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord." So Persia, the untimed liberator, will now face judgment, not because God has abandoned it, but because it has once again rebelled against his will. The Persian nation, like few other nations in the Bible, has traveled the full arc of divine history, from its formation in Genesis, its redeeming role in exile, and even its prophetic alliance in the final war. Iran's final fate, a forgotten prophecy. But what does the Bible reveal about Persia's ultimate fate? Was it doomed to total destruction, or was it given a chance at redemption? The answer lies between the lines, and is much more complex and powerful than commonly perceived. After describing the judgment of Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38 and 39, the Bible paints a horrifying picture. The army that rebelled against Israel is consumed by fire from heaven, corpses are strewn across the fields, weapons burn for 7 years, and the name Gog is forever synonymous with God's judgment. Persia, which is part of this alliance, will not escape punishment. But here is a surprising twist that Jeremiah had announced centuries earlier in a nearly forgotten passage, the word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah the prophet concerning Elam. I will break in pieces the bow of Elam, the backbone of its strength. Yet in the latter days I will restore the captives of Elam, declares the Lord D. It is a two-fold prophecy. First there is judgment, but then we read a surprising promise. In the last days I will restore Elam. This changes everything, because although Iran will rise up against Israel in the last days, although it will participate in the final assault that brings God's wrath, its story does not end in ruin. Even in judgment, God leaves the door open for redemption. The Iran we see in today's headlines, aggressive, defiant, entangled in dark alliances, will one day play a role in the world's restoration of biblical history. Persia mirrors humanity itself fallen, in need of redemption, judged, and restored by grace. That is why the final fate of Iran in the Bible is both a warning to empires that defy God and a promise to those who choose to repent. For it is written that in the last days, nations will make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts. It will happen that all the people who are left of the nations that have come against Jerusalem will go up year after year to worship the King and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Perhaps Elam will be among those nations. Perhaps Iran, once the enemy, the deliverer, and the judged nation, will see itself restored to glory. Even now, there is room in God's heart for those who return. From the first pages of Genesis to the sweeping vistas of Revelation, Persia is ever present. When humanity once again rose from the flood, God named Elam and Madai, silently sowing the seeds of an empire yet to be born. When Abraham rose up to rescue Lot, Elam became a threat. And when Babylon finally fell, Persia became an instrument of liberation. When the temple was rebuilt, it was a Persian king who provided the resources. And when the Messiah was born, the wise men of the East, men from Persia, were among the first to recognize him. But as the end times draw near and nations rise up like darkness against Israel, Persia will once again take center stage, but this time on the darker side of the prophecy. It is written that Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, forming an alliance against God's restored people. But even then, the book remains open. The Bible is not closed, and one day the nations will rise up and come to Jerusalem to celebrate the King. If Persia turns its face to God, its story will end not in ashes but in glory. Esther is the prophetic role of Iran today. And now, after all you have heard, I ask you, do you believe that Iran is fulfilling its prophetic role today? We live in a time when prophecies are quietly being fulfilled, and what once seemed ancient is now more alive than ever. Where do you think we stand in this story? Do you see signs of these prophecies in today's headlines? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.